Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. We're very excited that you're here for this session to learn about Napa Valley, our Napa Valley Rocks program, and maybe a few tips on how to sell Napa Valley wines. My name is Connor Best. I'm the head of global marketing for Napa Valley Vintners, and it's my privilege to lead this discussion. When thinking about how to sell Napa Valley wine, it's important that we all have knowledge of the regions that we're trying to sell. But it's also important that we have the little bits of information that we need in usable packages to sell Napa Valley wine so that when we walk into a wine store or when we walk into a restaurant and try to tell the sommelier about Napa Valley wines, that we have the bits of information that we need to clearly and succinctly communicate about the Napa Valley. So when we were thinking of this session today, we specifically had trade in mind. So if you're a consumer joining today, thank you so much for being here, but this will be a little peek behind the curtain. When we were designing this for the trade, we specifically had importers in mind. And our importers are so important to the Napa Valley because you are the person carrying the flag for our region all across the world in many languages. And we wanted to just make sure you had the tools you need and the little bits of information that you can repeat back to help you communicate about and confidently sell Napa Valley wines. So we call this program Napa Valley Rocks. And Napa Valley Rocks is actually part of a larger program that we have. Today, we're basically going to hit some of the highlights about Napa Valley Rocks, some of the overview of the region. We do have 2 additional sessions in a couple weeks on March 16th and 18th discussing the varieties of the Napa Valley and the AVAs of the Napa Valley, the subregions of the Napa Valley. And so I'd invite you to tune into those as well for a little bit deeper dive into the Napa Valley. But if you'd like to learn even more and about the history of the region, which we won't have time to go to today, and all of the other aspects of our region, please go to naparocks.com or napavintners.com and go to the trade section and the Napa Rocks page, where you can take an hour-long online course about the Napa Valley. And then we also have this presentation. So these slides plus many, many more and a whole instructor guide translated into 7 different languages. These are great tools to use to educate your sales teams and also to educate trade that you're trying to sell Napa Valley wine to. Also, we've been doing lots of different Napa Valley sessions, webinars like this. We have more than 36 hours of film, of recordings of Napa Valley sessions loaded onto our Napa Valley Sessions website. So please check them out. It's a great place to listen to stories, listen to other tidbits, and to both learn about the region, but also get little nuggets to bring into the market. So this whole Napa Valley Rocks program and today's session and the sessions on the 16th and the 18th are all to support a virtual trade fair that we're participating in. In fact, we have 23 wineries that will be looking for importers, looking for representation around the world. Go to hopwine.com for more information. The program will run March 16th through 19th, and it's a fairly new concept, but we think it is possibly the wave of the future when it comes to meeting trade around the world. So we're very excited to be presenting our wines. Which brings me to the Napa Valley. Whenever I think about the Napa Valley, or whenever I communicate about the Napa Valley to trade, media, consumers all around the world, I always come back to this phrase because I think it captures everything that we're trying to communicate. I always envision myself sitting at a dinner table, opening a bottle of Napa Valley wine and pouring it around for maybe friends, family, business acquaintances, someone that I'm trying to sell to maybe. And I think every time that I open this bottle of Napa Valley wine, I'm making this promise. I'm pouring you a wine of the highest quality, cultivated with excellence in one of the world's most extraordinary places. And so this session today, as well as the whole Napa Rocks program, is designed to unpack what does this mean and how do our wines, how do they represent some of the highest quality wines? What does it mean to be cultivated with excellence? And why is Napa Valley one of the most extraordinary and, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful places on earth? In fact, this picture here just put it into perspective, this picture here is taken on the main drag, Highway 29 through Napa Valley as you're heading north. It's right in front of the Forniente winery, kind of in the Tocolon vineyard, right before you get to Opus One on the right and Robert Mondavi on the left. So I think this picture really captures the beauty of Napa Valley, and it's taken right in the heart of where we are growing and cultivating some of the most extraordinary wines in the world. So to help me today explain and help to pass on some knowledge to you, I have an amazing panel of super knowledgeable and experienced vintners here. They have many years of making and selling Napa Valley wine. So I'll ask you all to pop on screen here. First up, we have Scott Meadows from Silenus. Scott has been with Silenus since 2001. He is the president of Silenus Wines, but he's also been the cellar master. He's also been the winemaker. He's done a little bit of everything. Scott has had an extreme amount of experience in Asia, in Japan, in China, speaks fluent Japanese, and has been one of our biggest champions in Asia, selling Napa Valley wines. Down we have Jeff Crawford. Jeff has been at Starmont, which is part of the Maryvale family of wines, since 2007. Same year I moved to the Napa Valley. Jeff is the winemaker at Starmont, and Starmont is a brand that specializes in Pinot and Chardonnay and more Burgundian style wines. Maryvale, the sister winery up in St. Helena, specializes in Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet, so he can speak to both brands. And then we have Amber Mina. Amber comes to us from Wisconsin, brings a ton of experience, starting early in adulthood, working in restaurants, going through the distributors channel. She was a salesperson. She's a fantastic educator. She came and also worked at the Napa Valley Vintners for a couple years and is now sales director for Stagland. So most of her experience is domestic, but she is taking on more and more of the international role and brings a ton of enthusiasm and experience to the table. So after introducing all of you, I want to give you an opportunity just to say something really quickly about your brands. So why don't ladies first? Amber, why don't you tell us just really quickly about Stagland?
Sure, of course. So Stagland Family Vineyard, we are a very small, family-owned and operated winery in the heart of the Rutherford Bench. We are also women-owned and women-run, organically farmed, solar-run, and produce very high-quality Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon off of the Rutherford Bench.
Jeff, over to you.
All right. Starmont is also a family-owned brand. As Connor mentioned, we're owned by the Schlatter family, who also owns Maryvale Vineyards. We have estate vineyards down in Carneros, planted mostly to Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and we also have estate vineyards up in the hills of St. Helena, planted to Bordeaux varietals, which are both sustainably farmed.
And then Scott.
Yes, Silenus Winery was founded actually in 1968. It came from a walnut orchard, came and found this area right in the Oak Knoll district, which is just north of the city of Napa, and tore out the walnuts and put in Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. And from there, we've continued to create wines, both from our vineyards and around us in the Oak Knoll district.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all three of you for joining us today. Looks like we have 84 people joining us live right now. And when I checked the RSVP list a couple days ago now, we had representatives or people RSVP from 18 or maybe it was 19 different countries around the world. So this truly is a worldwide Napa Valley Rocks. So I think one of the most important things when you're selling a wine or when you're talking about a region is to be able to communicate the why. And to communicate why Napa Valley. When I communicate about Napa, I always go back to that phrase where we produce wines of the highest quality, cultivated with excellence in one of the world's most extraordinary places. But I'd like to pose it to you now. Why Napa? When you're walking into a counter, when you're talking to an importer, Scott, why Napa Valley?
It's a great question. You know, I have to say that I like wine. I could put a period on that sentence. But when I was drinking wine and starting out, trying to determine where I wanted to go and how I wanted to be a part of this great industry, Napa wines kept coming up to me. They're a place, or they're wines that kind of come from an area that's a perfect climate zone to create lush, balanced, and elegant wines. And I love that you can drink them young, and you can age them, enjoy even more when they get older. And I think that's a quality they have that I think is just worth celebrating.
Jeff is the winemaker. Why Napa Valley? Why do you make Napa Valley wines?
The diversity and quality is what keeps me coming back for more. It's, you know, over the years making wine, being able to source from different vineyards throughout Napa Valley, all with a kind of unique combination of soil and climate, making top quality wines. You know, even just the estate vineyards that I mentioned, you know, working with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and then, you know, driving 45 minutes up into the hills and working with the mostly Cabernet Sauvignon that's planted up in the Profile Estate Vineyard. And all of the diversity in between. It keeps my passion stoked for the winemaking.
Fantastic. Amber.
Sure. Well, I would say, Connor, you started off this seminar talking about how beautiful Napa Valley is. I remember my first trip 21 years ago to Napa Valley. Really, it was one of the most beautiful places I had ever seen. So to be able to live here is really exciting. And then community, living in the community itself, there's a camaraderie that just does not exist in other communities. So lastly would be consistent quality. You know, there are very few wine regions in the world that every year you continuously have the excellence, the quality, and the commitment to sustainability and organic farming.
Yeah, fantastic. I love all of those. When people ask me, in addition to talking about our brand promise, I always tell them, for me personally, it's about the tomatoes. When I moved to Napa Valley in 2007, I just remember having these perfectly ripe tomatoes. And that was kind of one of the first things that really set Napa apart. And it seems like a goofy story. And again, this selling wine is all about telling stories, right? But I remember having these tomatoes, and then as I lived there a couple of years, putting it together, the perfect climate and the perfect soils that go to make this awesome tomato or what go into the wines. And like, if a place could grow produce as well as it does, as well as Napa Valley does, I mean, the wines are amazing there as well. So when my why is the tomatoes, but it's the climate, it's the soils, it's everything together that just make Napa one of the most perfect growing regions in the world. So
Connor, mine was peaches.
Peaches. I do remember this. We're working with you a few years ago, the peaches. So, I mean, Napa Valley is one of the most extraordinary places in the world. I firmly believe that, but also no place is without its challenges. And when you're selling Napa Valley wines in the market, I know there are challenges to selling Napa Valley wine. So really quickly, I would love for you to share just one tidbit or one thing that you hear, one obstacle to buying Napa Valley wines that you hear from trade in the market. And then throughout the rest of the presentation, we're going to try to unpack that a little bit so that you and the audience, when you get this same obstacle, when you hear this, you have a couple messages in queue and ready to go to combat that and to help that person overcome that obstacle. So why don't you start, Amber?
Sure. I can say that right now I'm in Texas actually working the market. So the last couple of days I've been out and talking to people about our wines in Napa Valley. And one of the big things that we hear a lot is price point. So why is your Cabernet $285 and I can buy one from somewhere else for $35? So that has been definitely a bigger, probably one of the biggest things that I hear in general.
Yeah. And if everyone sticks around, we'll unpack that a little bit more throughout the presentation, and we'll help you craft a good answer for that by the end. So Scott, over to you.
I would say another one that I hear often until people try the wines is the perception that they have high alcohol, and that you get a little too buzzed when you have a Napa wine. Yeah,
well, we'll unpack that as well. And Jeff, what do you hear as the winemaker? What do people tell you?
I think, to be honest, there's really not much you can say that against Napa Valley, other than kind of the main thing that Amber and Scott both pointed out already. Those are kind of the main things that, the price point, and then a potentially a lack of balance, and coming from the winemaking side of things, knowing what it takes to go into the quality of the wine that we make, and the diversity of the wines that are produced here in the valley. I think it's just a perception thing, and potentially just an education thing that we need to overcome. So hence the reason we're here today.
Perfect. And I'd like to invite everyone. I see there are a couple questions in queue. I think I'm going to save those two up for a little bit later in the presentation. But feel free to put your questions in Q&A. I'll try to get to them and weave them in as I can throughout the presentation. So I'm going to reshare my screen here with you. So just bear with me. And in understanding a region, it's always important to understand the place and where it is on the map and why that place is important. Because if you think about it, there's no other, there's only one place like Napa Valley on the globe, and it has to do with its proximity to the ocean, the proximity to other land masses. So Scott, could you tell us a little bit about where Napa Valley is and why that's important?
Yeah, it's great. Napa Valley actually resides in one of the, it's a sweet spot. It's exactly the right place. And it's kind of surprising. As you can see from the map, we're just north of San Francisco. On a good day, it's about an hour and a half in a car. So it's really nice and has good proximity to, world-class city. Even so, it's exactly equally located between two really important climate zones. On the left, you have the Pacific Ocean, which is about 58 kilometers away. And the Pacific is cold, brings in cold air at night. And because we're sort of just off the coast, that cool air will come and hit us in the evening, but it doesn't get us too cold, and it doesn't keep us cold during the day. To the right of us, to the east of us, about another 58 kilometers is the Central Valley of California. And that's where the heat comes up during the day. It's Sacramento in that area. And so we don't get that level of heat, but we get influenced by that as we're right between it. And that heat rolls over into the valley during the day to be replaced by the cool air from the Pacific at night. And that combination, which we're going to talk about, in addition to sort of the shape of the valley, really allows Napa Valley to maintain the perfect temperature to grow grapes and basically to live. It's one of the best places to live too, because of the climate, the temperature. And given that, it allows the grapes to grow so well that the wines or the grapes from that region and the wines that are made from them have a very distinctive flavor. When you have a Napa wine, you know it. It's not from another part of California. It's not from another state. It's not from another region. And that distinctiveness was celebrated in 1981 when Napa was named the first AVA or agricultural or American and viticultural area in California. And that celebrates that distinctiveness. So when you have a Napa wine, that you're having a Napa wine.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Scott. And I think this next slide here, just to give us another view of the Napa Valley. So this is taken from Google Earth, and it's looking slightly west-northwest. You can see the city of Napa down there, and the Calistoga, St. Helena as you go further to the right and up north. But all of the vineyards that we're going to be talking about today are starred here. So down in Carneros, all the way on the left is Jeff's Carneros Pinot Chardonnay vineyard. As you work your way northwest, you get to Salinas, to the Stagland vineyard, and then to the Maryvale Profile vineyard all the way furthest north and to the right on the map. Do you want to say anything else about this map, Scott?
Yeah, and so what's interesting is if you look carefully in the upper left, you'll see the ocean actually over those mountains. It's a ways out there, but we're bordered on the west by mountains and on the east by mountains. And you can see that as we're coming in. The left side of the screen is where the San Francisco Bay is. And so that cool air will come up from the bottom of the bay and up over the mountains into the valley on our left. And the heat that we were talking about during the day comes from the right. And it comes and drops down into our bowl. And you can see with the shape that we've got, and we'll talk a little bit more about that now as we go through it, but that shape really helps channel the air and gives Napa a lot of different climate zones that allow us to grow just about any kind of varietal.
Sorry, this accidentally skipped ahead. So this is a map of the 16 sub-AVAs of Napa Valley. Napa Valley is divided into 16 sub-AVAs that are all within the greater Napa Valley AVA. You'll often see these names on the labels. Jeff, could you just give us a little tour here with the different areas of the valley and maybe some characteristics of the different areas?
Yeah, definitely. I'll go ahead and start in the south, down in Carneros, where, as you mentioned, we have our estate vineyards down there. So maritime influence, just a couple of miles away from the San Pablo Bay. So that maritime influence helps to keep things cooler. The cool climate varietals, in particular Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, is where the predominance of those varieties are planted down there. Then as you move up, as you drive north on Highway 29, we start getting kind of warmer and warmer. We'll stop in Coombsville, once again, kind of a cooler region, good for Merlot, as well as some cooler climate style Cab, up into Oak Knoll, Valley Floor, Mount Veeder, very mountainous, and some nooks and crannies up there, into Yountville, once again, kind of Valley Floor, Stag's Leap, Atlas Peak, up into the hills and to the east. As we move further north, we're getting warmer and warmer. And in general, that's always one of the things I want to stress, is that there is a lot of diversity, and it's good to talk in generalities, but at the same time, it's also good to keep in mind that there are little pockets of this and that. One of the things that we'll probably touch on a little bit as well is as also beside just the climate, as we're going across up the valley, but also the diversity in soils as well. So it's that combination of the soils and the climate that really creates those unique pockets. So we keep going north up into St. Helena. As we mentioned, up in the hills above St. Helena is where the Profile Estate Vineyard is located, and then up into Spring Mountain, Diamond Mountain, and then Calistoga being one of the furthest north and one of the warmer parts of Napa Valley. And then we've got Howell Mountain in Childs Valley over on the east side as well. So lots of diversity and uniqueness that is created from those different AVAs.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning the AVAs, or American viticultural areas, are each recognized by the federal government, because the vintners and the growers and winemakers of each area petitioned the government and said, we are unique, and they have to list all the reasons why they're unique, and the government comes in and says, yes, you are distinctive and you're unique, and we're going to define these boundaries for you. So I think this, the fact that there are 16 nested AVAs within the Napa Valley just speaks to the diversity. It's also important to note that not all of our wines are labeled with a sub-AVA. If a wine is, say, a blend of many different AVAs, it's probably labeled just as Napa Valley. And there are grapes grown in areas of the valley that don't fit neatly within an AVA, say out here in the Pope Valley area, and then other places kind of just in the little in-betweens. So those may just say Napa Valley on them. So I pulled a couple pictures that just will illustrate and kind of tell us a little bit about the Napa Valley, just to give you a sense of it. So a couple pictures of Carneros. This is that cooler Burgundian area. This is in the early spring. You can see the mustard, and another picture in the summer in Carneros. So you kind of get a sense of the rolling hills. And this is down south, down here next to the San Pablo Bay. As you go a little bit further north, if you're standing in Yountville, kind of just north of the city of Napa and looking west, you see this. And this is the Mayacamas range going on the western side of Napa Valley. And you can look how forested it is. It's a much lusher mountain range compared to, say, the Vaca range. This is if you're standing near that same area, but turn around, you will be seeing this mountain, a much more rugged, much more arid, dry mountain range. It's interesting, both mountains actually receive about the same amount of rain, but the eastern facing Mayacamas range gets less of that afternoon drying sun. So therefore, it's a little cooler, retains a little bit more moisture. I think the wines reflect that compared to the wines of, say, Stag's Leap and How Mountain, which get a lot more sun. They tend to be riper, bigger. So you can just kind of see some of the diversity just based on where the wines are grown. This is another picture from Yountville looking north in the valley. You can clearly see the valley floor hampered in or pinned in by the two mountain ranges. This is looking south from St. Helena. And so that last picture was taken from about here, looking southeast here. And then you can see the vines up in Calistoga. And again, this is the Vaca range that you can see that is so dry. And then one of my favorite pictures of the Napa Valley, this is looking from Pritchard Hill. Pritchard Hill is a little area, well, about right here. It's not in a specific AVA, but to many very famous wineries are up there, and it's hillside looking down onto the valley. So this is looking west over a vineyard that we call Oakville Ranch into the valley floor and onto the Mayacamas range. So as you can see, there's a huge diversity of different terrain in Napa Valley, which leads to different styles all over the valley. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, tune in on March 18th, where we'll dive a little bit more deeply into the AVAs of Napa Valley. So I'd like to just turn over, Jeff, you pretty much produce, between Maryvale and Starmont, you pretty much produce the gamut. So tell us a little bit about the varieties of Napa Valley.
Yeah, so the king of Napa Valley obviously is the Cabernet Sauvignon, the most planted variety. I think it's about half of all the vines planted in Napa are planted to Cabernet Sauvignon. And then we've got Chardonnay, which is also heavily planted as well. As I mentioned, there's a lot of Chardonnay down in Carneros, but it's actually planted throughout Napa Valley as well. And that's one of the things about Napa. You can get those different styles. I don't think it was mentioned yet, but Napa Valley from north to south is only about 30 miles and about 5 miles at its widest point east to west. And so that amount of diversity and stylistic variation within such a small geographic region is one of the things that why we keep talking about that diversity. Then Merlot, once again, well, Napa Valley, particularly for me, I like the South Napa Valley, kind of cooler climate. Merlot, earlier ripening grape than Cabernet, does well in the cooler climate. Particularly in blends, can add some nice acidity and different characteristics to the cab dominated blends, but also be bottled on its own. Sauvignon Blanc, Connor, you mentioned Pope Valley not being an AVA in and of itself, but I've worked with fruit from Pope Valley, Sauvignon Blanc from Pope Valley for many years, and the quintessential Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, I think, gets grown up there. Very complex and diverse. Pinot Noir as well. Once again, a lot of it planted down in Carneros, cool climate. Scott had mentioned about the maritime influence and the warming influence of the Central Valley. So we can get the grapes ripe during the day, but at the same time, it gets nice and cool at night to help retain that acidity. So Pinot Noir does great here in Napa Valley. Zinfandel, also a pretty heavily planted grape. And then we've got the Cabernet Franc. You'll find all 5 of the major Bordeaux varietals planted throughout Napa Valley for obvious reasons. Pete Syrah, harkening back to the history of Napa Valley, one of the early grapes that found its way into the valley. So that one's an interesting one as far as the historical standpoint, and does great in this climate as well. And then Syrah, which we actually have a couple acres planted down in Carneros on our estate vineyard as well. So I'm very familiar with the Syrah planted in Napa as a result of that also. So, and then, but this is one of those things that I think is interesting to point out, you know, as far as the AVAs, the American viticulture areas, here in the US, that is a geographic designation, but unlike other parts of the world where they have the appellation system, we are not governed by what varieties we can plant, you know, the yields we can get off of those varieties, the winemaking styles and techniques that we can produce. So there's a lot of flexibility, and you know, it's, if it grows well there, it will do well there, and so there's a lot of experimentation as well, and it's one of the things that I think is very interesting about Napa Valley in relation to the rest of the world, that also once again, as a winemaker, keeps things very exciting and fun.
Well said. That was very well said. I mean, harkening back to our wanting everyone to walk away with taglines, one of the taglines that I always say is, in Napa Valley, we produce everything from Albarino to Zinfandel. There are about 40 different, maybe more than 40 different varieties planted here. Yes, about half the acreage, maybe a little bit more than half, is Cabernet, but you do find a little bit of everything here, which goes to the flexibility that our legal system allows us, and also that sense of like, we can always experiment, we can always try new things. So thanks, Jeff, for talking about that. Amber, over to you to just talk about a couple other facts about the Napa Valley that people might not know, and that I think are really great selling points for our wines.
Yes, of course. So, you know, I've traveled really not only around the country, but around the world. And when you say the word Napa Valley, or if you ask people about California wine or American wine, the first thing that really comes to their mind is Napa Valley. And, you know, going around and seeing that, I think people think that Napa Valley is a very large area because that is what they know about American wine. But yet we only produce 4% of California's wine in general. And if you think about that, we have the global name, we have what people really recognize in terms of American wine as being Napa Valley, but yet we produce a very tiny amount of that. And on the world spectrum of wine that we produce, we only produce 0.04% of the world's wine, which I think is also pretty interesting. So we are definitely a wine growing region of not making a ton of wine, but that is our main business there in the Napa Valley. But we're also a great wine growing region of very small producers. So we're very focused on family owned wineries, and about 95% of our wineries in the Napa Valley are family owned and operated, just like us at Stagland family as well. And when you really think about the differences in the terms of the camaraderie and how small we are in the Napa Valley, it brings a sense of community and balance. And we definitely end up really focusing in on organics, sustainability, and those are things that really bring forth a lot. And going into soils, also many different soil types, soil differences in the valley. I know that was one of the questions in the Q&A, and you know, soils and diversity really go hand in hand. So focusing in on that and the soil diversity can really bring forth all the differences in the varieties itself. Also bringing differences in the different AVAs with Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah. So yeah, now I think we should dive into soils, but I want to address one question in the Q&A that we can address really fast. Paul asked, why does it get warmer as you go north in the Napa Valley rather than getting cooler like you would think? I mean, keep in mind, Napa Valley is a relatively small region, so we're not going a huge geographic distance when we go from south to north. And the south is at borders on the San Pablo Bay and has the most access to the Petaluma Gap, both avenues for cool air to access the valley. So proximity to water, basically. And then you get warmer, warmer, warmer until you get up to St. Helena and the southern part of Calistoga. And then right at the northern tip of Calistoga, there's actually a little gap in the mountains that lets some cool breeze come in through the Russian River Gap. And that the Russian River is actually in Sonoma, but it lets a little cool air through that gap. So the far northern part of Napa Valley is actually a little bit cooler than, say, St. Helena, the city. So that's why you get warmer as you go north. So in thinking of the soils of the Napa Valley, I mean, and to understand any wine growing region, you have to understand the soils, the chalk of Champagne and Burgundy, the gravel of the left bank. I mean, you have to understand the soils, but taking a look at this map, this is a map that some soil scientists made for us as part of the development of this content. And this is the soil series of Napa Valley. And I say one of the challenges of Napa Valley is understanding the soils because this is a mess. It's actually so complicated. If you think about it, where is California? California is at the edge of a continent. It's at a place that has, for millions, billions of years, has had earthquakes and volcanoes. It's had a violent history. So there's no wonder that throughout the billions of years, our soils have just been churned up in different rock types. We have, I think, 3 kind of fundamentally different bedrock types in Napa. The Great Valley sedimentary sequence. We have a host of different volcanic soils, and we also have seafloor material, all in Napa Valley. And they're jumbled together and then eroded and settled in different places, which gives us this map. Which means if you're in, let's say, on Mount Veeder down here, you can walk and be in 5 or 6 different soil series in just probably one or vineyard or just a mile apart. So understanding the soils of the Napa is actually really complicated, which tends to be why, I mean, a part of that diversity, but it also tends to be why we simplify them into understanding the valley in 3 different areas. So I'd say it's easiest to understand the Napa Valley in kind of oversimplified ways like this: fluvial soils, the soils nearest the river; the alluvial soils, the soils at the edge of the mountains that are deep and gravelly; and then the mountain soils. And different grape varieties, different styles are made in each. So when you're thinking of a Napa Valley wine, which soils were those grapes grown in, and what variety is it, and what style was the winery going for? So the fluvial soils along the river tend to be heavier, full of clay, tend to be more Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and tend to go down into the Carneros region, great for Chardonnay and Pinot as well. Alluvial, great for Cabernet and all the different Bordeaux varieties, but tend to be a little bit more restrained, maybe a little bit more balanced than, say, the mountainside Cabernet, which tends to be really big and gregarious and complex, and just a completely different style of wine. And then thinking of the mountainside, you also have eastern facing and western facing slopes. So huge amount of diversity here. So I think when understanding the Napa Valley, it's easiest to understand us in terms of climate. And so, Scott, do you want to actually, Amber, do you want to tell us a little bit about just the overall climate of Napa Valley? Then I'll let Scott to go into a little bit more detail.
Sure. So we also have a very diverse climate, really, from north to south, as we already talked about. But if you think about really the best climate in the world, and one of the reasons why I moved to Napa Valley is because of that Mediterranean climate zone. Not only are we able to, grow and plant and grow amazing vegetables, fruits, and grapes, but that Mediterranean climate zone has a couple of different things and only covers 2% of the Earth's surface. And we're really one of the only areas in the United States that has that as well. So we have hot days and cool nights, and we have that beautiful fog that rolls in from the San Pablo Bay that covers the Napa Valley itself, so cools things down. Yes, we're very hot during the day, But at night, with that cool down, it really retains acidity and characters inside of the Napa Valley. Also, we have very little rain from essentially from March, April until October. And with having very little rain, we're able to, in the vineyards itself, have less molds and less problems in the vineyard because of that. I know growing up in Wisconsin, I despise mosquitoes, and not having mosquitoes in the Napa Valley is probably one of the best things. But yeah, that fog in the Napa Valley definitely plays a vital role in cooling down the actual grapes itself at night. And also for us, we're on the west side in the Mayacamas, so for us we get much less sunlight because that fog has to blow off in the morning. So very different, as Connor was saying, with the eastern being much less vegetation.
Yeah, I think well said. I mean, I think the combination of the Mediterranean climate gives us this great sun for ripening, so we get the awesome fruit that Napa Valley wines are known for, but then we're close enough to the coast and we get that cooling influence to lower the temperatures to preserve balance overnight and preserve acidity. So we have this great balance in our wines. Scott, I mean, actually we're running slightly short on time, so I think I'll just skip ahead because we'll cover plenty of the diversity when we talk about all of our different wineries here. So I think now we're going to turn attention to the 4 different vineyard sites that I highlighted at the beginning, the 4 different vineyard sites where our wineries here make wines from. And so here, Jeff, this is a Google Earth picture, basically looking west, northwest. Your vineyard would be here, your Stanley Ranch vineyard, where you source many of your Chards and Pinots. Tell us just a little bit about this area here.
Yeah, so typical Carneros from the standpoint, clay soils, heirloom soils. There's not a lot of diversity as far as soil type goes down in Carneros, but those rolling hills that you had captured in the pictures that we looked at earlier have a little topography, but generally not very much elevation overall in Carneros as well. But the main thing is that influence, and you can see in this picture on the upper left hand, that's the Napa River draining into the San Pablo Bay. That's how close we are to that maritime influence. As Amber mentioned, fog comes in. It takes a while for it to burn off in the morning. So that's one of the things I always like to try to point out with Carneros is, there is a difference in high temperatures from south to north, maybe about 15 degrees or so. But for me, one of the things about the difference in climate or difference in, wine styles is not only that difference in high temperatures, but how long throughout the day it's reached. And so, you don't reach those high temperatures in Carneros until later in the day. And then in the evening, you get breezes coming through and cooling things down. So you get warm enough to get ripe, but at the same time, you don't stay warm for a long time throughout the day. And then the cooling influence at night helps the grapes kind of shut down, rest, retain good acidity, and that's the reason why the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir do so well down in Carneros.
Yeah, and I think most of this, also the sparkling wines that are produced in Napa, most of the fruit for those are sourced from down in Carneros. So Scott, this is a picture of basically your vineyards here. I mean, not all of them on here, but your vineyards. This would be your winery here, and your vineyards kind of extending here, and we're looking essentially west up against the Mayacamas range. Tell us a little bit about this area.
Yeah, so our area is located on alluvial fan soils, that sort of middle ground with good gravelly deep soil. And that's the result of runoff over millions of years coming from the mountains. It's ancient seabed that got pushed up. And that soil comes down and forms these bench vineyards that go along the west of along the Mayacamas mountain range. And what that gives us is deep roots that can go down, they can grab water deep. It means that we can control our irrigation, since it doesn't rain in the summer. We can control the amount of water we put on, but because of those deep roots, we can water a lot less and really control sort of the hydration and the flavors and the range of the soils. We're also just north of the city of Napa, and we're right at the part of the valley where it starts to narrow. And so coming from Carneros, you get those breezes that come off the bay that are cool in the afternoon, and you'll come up and hit our vineyards here, and then it starts to narrow, and that cool air will shoot up at night up into the valley. Well, that same air coming in the morning will come down the valley with the hot air that slowly burns the fog off and warms us up all the way down into Carneros. So we're kind of right at that midpoint between where those two bands of climate reach each other. And that gives our vineyards the opportunity to have really long hang time. We get really nice and cool for Cabernet in the evenings, but nice and warm during the day. And we can let the grapes hang a lot longer, which can balance the wines, make them lush, and keep a really nice elegance to them.
Yeah, this question would go for actually for any of you, but one of the things that I think sets Napa Valley apart is, I mean, Scott, you were referencing the kind of micro farming almost, like the giving specific amounts of irrigation, the attention that we're paying to the vines. I mean, just if you had to guess on an average year, how many times would a human walk between this row? In your vineyard, Scott, and then Jeff in your vineyard, Amber in your vineyard, or touch the vine. How many times are these vines touched with a human hand? I mean,
yeah, it's a really tough question to answer. Unlike a lot of other regions, we're definitely focused on, high quality. And what that means is we do a lot less machine farming. Our vineyards are all hand done, hand pruned, hand leafed, hand cropped, hand harvested. Same with the work that happens in the vineyard. So going up and down this vineyard row with either the workers or me or the winemaker assessing the grapes, we do it at least once a week over the course of the entire year just to check up on everything at a minimum.
Yeah, Jeff, what would you say for your vineyards?
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely, certainly once a week, if not almost, and at certain times of the year. I mean, it's a daily thing with multiple people going up and down the rows. A lot of attention to the detail. The thing about farming is similar to winemaking is you have to stay on top of it. You have to identify issues, preferably before they arise. And if they do start to arise, as quickly as possible, because that's how you mitigate those issues without hurting quality. And that's what it comes down to, is that attention is required. I mean, even in the off season when the vines are dormant, there's a lot of activity in the vineyards, cultivating cover crop, pre-pruning, getting ready. Just it seems like there's always something going on.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to kind of underscore the quality, and like going back to that price question. I mean, anytime someone brings up a price question, I think we can talk about the quality and how this is Napa Valley. We're not farming 100 acres at a time. We're not farming 10 acres at a time. We're farming acre at a time, half acre at a time, sometimes row at a time. And I think just that value that produces, the quality, the attention to detail, all goes into that. And I think that value that a Napa Valley wine brings to the table, literally brings to your dining room table, is what really sets Napa apart. And I think that's a good segue into Stagland here. Stagland Vineyards would be here, the winery kind of up here against the hillside. Amber, tell us a little bit about Stagland.
Sure. So Stagland Family Vineyard, we are nestled up in that Mayacamas Benchland area on the west side. And we're pretty lucky because we own about 70 acres, and we are able to be underneath the tallest point on the Mayacamas Range, Mount St. John. And that area is pretty special because it allows us to not only grow Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Petit Verdot, also a little bit of actual Sangiovese in the property, which is fun. But we do start off on that top of the benchland and very deep gravelly soils, as most of that is in that alluvial fan. But as you go down into the east end of our vineyard, we have about 9 acres of Lake County clay soil. And we're able to produce Chardonnay there, which we're one of the very few to actually grow Chardonnay in the Rutherford AVA. Many people say that it's too hot, but because of the sun rising on the east and going over into the west side, once that sun hits Mount St. John, that tallest peak, it provides us with a bunch of shade, which is really allowing our vineyard to have, during the hottest part of the day, a shaded area. So we do produce Chardonnay as well. And as we were saying earlier about going through the vineyards, David Abreu and his farming team have been farming our property since '85. And we actually during harvest will go through between 3 and 8 times on just one vine, picking the actual bunches when they're ready, not just picking everything at once. So it's a really important part of what we do on Stagland as well. And a lot of our really old vineyards are up on top of the benchland itself. And I think a really easy way to think about what the benchland area is, or alluvial fans, and we've already talked about it eroding down and creating a new soil series once you take the actual soil from the valley floor as well. So a lot of times people will use the term Rutherford dust for our area in Rutherford. And, you know, I'm always in between on what I think about that, but that term really, I think, is justified talking about alluvial soils and combining and finding new areas. So just a really special piece of land.
Absolutely. And then last vineyard, by the way, we want to point out to everyone, this mountain over here on the far right-hand side of the screen, that's Mount St. Helens, or Mount St. Helena, which is the highest point in Napa Valley. Not an actual volcano, but the highest point, about 4,400 feet in elevation. So it's a reference point for anyone looking around in Napa Valley. You can always tell where you are by your relationship with that mountain. And this is just a vineyard taken from the hillside looking east at the Stagland vineyards. And then here, this is a picture of the Napa Valley from a little south of St. Helena looking north. You can see Mount St. Helena up there. And then you can see the main valley here, but there's hillsides, vineyards everywhere, all up in here. And then Howe Mountain up here. This would be Spring Mountain and Diamond Mountain a little further over here. So Jeff's profile vineyard, it's somewhere, I'm not exactly sure which plot of land it is, but it's somewhere right up in this area here. Jeff, do you want to tell us a little bit about that vineyard? And I'm going to go and you just to tune into this aerial shot of it.
Yeah, beautiful spot up there. You know, one of the things to kind of frame this this conversation, as we were talking about the climate, I always like to compare Napa Valley to other top wine regions in the world. And, you know, one of the things I say is Napa Valley is not a marginal climate for growing grapes. You know, I like to joke around, we talk about vintages in terms of, you know, was it a good vintage, a great vintage, a once in a lifetime vintage? We don't talk about bad vintages here in Napa Valley. You know, to compare to another, you know, world-class growing region like Champagne, where, you know, it's did the grapes get ripe this year? Yeah, it was a good vintage. You know, did we lose the entire crop to hail? That's not the type of challenges that we are faced with here in Napa Valley. So really for us, in order to get these special iconic wines, we need that struggle for the vines, and one of the ways to achieve that is up in the mountain vineyards, where you have less topsoil, you know, more drainage, and you know, just a little with all these different exposures, you know, so little more difficult to get the grapes consistently ripe. They have to struggle a little bit more, and that's where a lot of that complexity comes from. So you the grapes from this the wine that get made from the grapes from this section, you know, all this goes into the iconic profile red blend that we produce. And what you can expect from that is, nice dense tannins, but very refined, and with an elegance to it as well, that we're able to produce from up at that vineyard as well. Something we're very proud of. It's that uniqueness, and it's very special. And wouldn't even be able to plant that vineyard anymore with the regulations that are now in place. So it's rare. So it's a special place.
Well, that's awesome. I'd like to just address a couple of the questions that have come up, and I have two other questions that I would pose to kind of end us today. But first, someone asked about the typical temperatures in Celsius. So a typical summer day in Napa Valley, you may have a high of about 35 degrees up in St. Helena, maybe 35, 36, 7 up in St. Helena, the warmest part of the valley. And down in Carneros, you're looking at more of a high of, say, 32. But then your temperatures are dropping at night, that diurnal shift. So up in St. Helena, your typical nighttime temperature is about 10 degrees. So you're having about a 25 degree diurnal shift, 25 degrees Celsius diurnal shift in St. Helena. The temperatures don't drop quite as much down in Carneros, but they are not as warm, and they're not as warm for as long down in Carneros. So I think a typical nighttime temperature down in Carneros is, say, about 15 degrees. Would you agree, Jeff?
Celsius is a little rusty, but that sounds right.
Yeah. So the temperatures in Fahrenheit are usually up valley about 95 degrees in the day, about 50 degrees at night, and down in Carneros maybe 85 during the day, and maybe 60 or so at night. So two last questions just to address some of the things that have come through in the chat here. Jeff, to you, I know your winery is sustainable, both facilities, or your facilities are certified, Napa Green Land and Winery. They're certified sustainable. Tell us what that means in the Napa Valley.
Yeah, so the Napa Green Land program is an organization that looks at the holistic farm plan for the vineyards that are located in Napa Valley. So looking at erosion and sediment runoff to try to minimize those aspects, looking at the overall kind of impacts as far as inputs from different chemicals that might get used on the vineyard, and minimizing those inputs, and just trying to, the main goal is to try to make sure that we keep our watersheds healthy. For us, it's the Napa River watershed down in Carneros. But really, it's that kind of holistic look, and looking at the overall farm plan. One of the things I like to juxtapose when we're talking about this, organic certification is something that people are very familiar with. So how does this differ? With the organic certification, that only limits the chemicals that you can use on the vineyard, but it doesn't take a look at the overall farm plan and everything that goes into how you're farming, and so it's a little more intensive from that standpoint. And then the Napa Green Winery certification, very focused on usage, so trying to minimize electricity usage, trying to minimize water usage, just making sure that we're doing those things as smart as possible, and with as little impact, and making sure that we're dealing with potential, wine is a very acidic compound, so making sure that it's not going into sewers and causing issues, getting once again back into the water system, and so kind of that overall holistic look, making sure that we're minimizing pollutants, and also minimizing waste as well through composting and recycling. Once again, that kind of holistic approach to the way that wine is made and thinking about everything that goes.
Very well said. And just to underscore a couple other things about the Napa Green program as well. It's independently certified, it's third-party certified, it's voluntary, but it's way heads and tails above the minimum government relations. And it's also a program that's based on continuous improvement. And so it's not, you don't just self-certify at a certain bar and then you're certified forever, but it's taking a look at your farm plan and your winery operations and say, have you improved? Okay, next, and you're going to be recertified in a couple of years. Have you improved? And with this, the program itself is constantly evolving and getting more and more stringent as we go along. And so as of right now, about 90% of the land in Napa County is under high levels of certification and protection from development. And they'll be announcing later this spring some additional measures to Napa Green to increase its focus on carbon forming and climate change and reducing the impacts of climate change and offsetting our impacts of climate change, and also introducing social equity and equality and kind of more that social minded piece to it. So that will all be coming out. And I think that's just a good example of how this program is continually evolving to keep us at the cutting edge and keep us doing better and better. And so Scott, over to you. We can't leave here without talking a little bit about the 2020 vintage. It's come up a couple times in the questions. And I just, as a winery president, who you're making decisions about whether to do business or whether to make wines, what wines you're going to be putting out in the market. As a winery president, how do you respond to people when they ask about the 2020 vintage?
Yeah, the 2020 vintage was really, actually prior to the fires, it was shaping up to be a fantastic vintage, and that didn't change in lots of parts of the valley. Of course, the area where the fire came through, north in St. Helena, the devastation was horrible for the wineries up there and for the regions. So we can't minimize that. But outside of that, it's a very winery and vineyard specific situation. It depends on what your proximity was to the fires and to the smoke. And so, as it turns out, there's probably about 80% of the wineries that will come out with some 2020 vintage. Everyone though, and from my position down, everyone's solely focused on quality. And so the grapes are being tested, the wine is being tested, both in the labs and in sensory, and that'll continue throughout the vintage. So what does come out, I think, will be a fantastic vintage, but it will definitely be a lot less than what we've had in the past. And a lot of wineries are making very tough decisions on what they can and can't put out into the market.
Perfect. Well said. I think to wrap up, sorry to apologize to everyone. We went a little bit over time, but I think this was time well spent. I hope everyone takes away a couple messages that they can use while selling Napa Valley wines in the market. So at the end of the day, we're all in the sales game, of course. So what's your close? When you're leaving someplace, how do you sum it all up? And I'll ask each of you just to spend a couple seconds giving me your reason why. Again, restating it about why Napa Valley, something that our attendees can take away and use in the market as they're communicating about Napa Valley wines. Anyone? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. So I always say the best part about drinking Napa is you don't have to look at the vintage to see if it's going to be a good one. You can open it, you can drink it, it's delicious, and you can always share with friends, which is the best.
Scott?
One of the things I like to talk about, because we do have a diversity of varieties and wines in Napa, is that Napa encapsulates sort of all of the European continent in one small valley. And we can grow every kind of variety. We can grow it well because of the climate zones. And so it's fun to pull out a bunch of different wines that you wouldn't normally associate with one region and share those with people.
Fantastic. And over to you, Jeff.
One of the things we're most proud of is the sustainability aspect, and with the being a family-owned winery that's that's raising the next generation here. It's more than just marketing. It's a way of life. Trying to think about the next generation and doing what we can for everyone, as well as making world-class wine.
Well, all well said. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you all to all of you out in the audience for attending. If you're interested in learning more about Napa Valley, please email me or check out our Hopwine booth. Go to hopwine.com to register for the H3 show, especially for any importers out there. We have 23 wineries looking to increase their representation with importers all around the world. So lots of great wines for offer. So please check that out. And then please also tune in on the 16th and the 18th of March. You can check out our website to RSVP for a little bit deeper dive into the varieties and to the AVAs of Napa Valley. So thank you all and have a fantastic rest of your day wherever in the world you are.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
everyone.